event forwarding. This nugget's going to be pretty straightforward with event forwarding, which gives us the ability to take events that are created on one computer, have them forwarded onto another computer, and then be able to potentially centralize event logs from multiple computers and make it easier to read rather than having to chase them all over the network. We'll start off with just kind of a functional overview of event forwarding and some key concepts and things to keep in mind, and then we'll simply move into the demos of actually how to configure event forwarding. Hey, have you ever been in search of something that was in front of you the whole time? Could have been your car keys. You were looking all over the house for them, but they were on the hook by the back door the whole time, or the coffee table, or your desk, or the kitchen counter. Or it could be that they're in between the couch cushions, or a 2-year-old ran off with them, or something like that. But a lot of times, the answers we need are right in front of us. In fact, I recently experienced that myself when I was in search of wildflowers here in the spring of Arizona, where we don't get wildflowers very often, but this year we did. And so, of course, in the desert regions where I live, you really go searching for those wildflowers whenever you hear that they're out there. It's pretty novel. So I took about a day and a half, and I was looking for wildflowers all over. I went out to some remote places, and quite frankly, I wasn't really that happy with the results I got. I think it was just my lack of skill. I just wasn't getting what I needed. And then one morning, I woke up and I thought, you know what? I'm going to go climb this mountain that's 200 yards from my house. So I just went over there real quick, and I was lazy enough to actually drive over there, by the way, even though it was only 200 yards away. And I decided to finally go up to this mountain and look. I finally got the shot that I wanted. A beautiful blue sky with clouds, which we don't get here very often in Arizona. Beautiful wildflowers, and of course, what the state's known for, these big saguaro cactuses. All right, enough about cactus, or cacti, I guess we'd call the plural. But here we're going to be talking really about event forwarding in particular. And although there's a lot of new things with the event log that we have available to us, this is our focus for right now. And we first of all need to nail down a couple of terms. One of those is the forwarder. The other one is the collector. The forwarder is the computer from which I want to view the results. It might be something across the other side of my campus or the other side of my planet or something far away that I don't really want to visit that computer all the time to look at the events. So this is the distant computer that I want to retrieve events from. The collector computer is likely the computer where I actually sit, where I'm going to actually see the events come into the event viewer in my local computer, and where I can kind of collect them from one or more distant computers. So more likely this is my own Windows Vista computer. Now, this forwarding and collecting whole idea, all this event forwarding, actually also works, by the way, with Windows Server 2008 in much the same way that I'll show you here. Also, we have a tendency to look at HTTP and HTTPS as the ability to transmit that data. When the forwarder sends the data to the collector, it by default is going to use HTTP. Now, a lot of people get a little concerned about that and they say, oh, well, wait a minute, HTTP is not encrypted or secure or anything like that. But in reality, it is going to encrypt the data even over HTTP using the Microsoft Negotiate Security Support Provider, or SSP, in workgroup environments. Okay, if you're using a domain environment, it's still going to encrypt them, but it's going to use the Microsoft Kerberos SSP in Kerberos environments. So there's really not a whole lot of need for HTTPS unless you just really want to add that additional layer. Of course, that's going to then add an additional layer of encryption there if you want it. And then also, because it's going to use HTTP or HTTPS, you're going to have to open up the firewall to allow that client to send out data through HTTP, because, of course, that's how it's going to be communicating. This can be done in a kind of a semi-automated way, which you'll see me do as we start to do some demonstrations here. So that's pretty easy. And then there's a couple of different services that need to run as well. On both the forwarding computer, the forwarder, and on the collector computer, you need to have two services running, the Windows Remote Management Service and the Windows Event Collector Service. And we'll see those as we go, or else I'd write them in here. But you'll see them in just a bit here. And then on the collector computer, you only need to have the Windows Event Collector Service running. Okay, so just make sure that you have everything running in place, and everything should go just fine. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at how we can configure this then. I've kind of been wanting to monitor events that were taking place on my laptop computer, which is this Lenovo system here, and I just named it Lenovo 64 because it runs a 64-bit version of Windows Vista. But I wanted to kind of see what was happening on this system remotely on my desktop computer over here, which is James Vista 64. Okay, and of course it's also running a 64-bit version of Windows. So let's go ahead and take a look then at how we can make this work. I'm going to go to my Lenovo 64 system here, and I'm just going to go to a administrator command prompt. You can just, and by the way, let me give you a tip here as well. I could right click and choose run as administrator, but I could also go here to the search item and go CMD, press Control and Shift and press Enter, and that will then automatically open up the administrator prompt. And of course I have to consent to user account control. Then the next thing I need to do is to just type WinRM, which is the remote management function here, quick config. And it's really been made pretty easy. I mean, Microsoft probably could have put together a UI for this. I'm not really quite sure why they didn't. But in terms of the command line, it's not horribly complicated in comparison to some other things that you might have to do. So what we're going to do is go ahead and press Enter here, and it tells me that it needs to do a few different things. When it needs to use a Windows Remote Management Service type to delayed auto start. Okay, that's what WinRM is Windows Remote Management Service. I need to start the service, and I need to enable a firewall exception. One thing I don't see that I've already had done at a different time was it will also create a WinRM listener on an HTTP port, or port 80, to accept any requests for this, because this again takes place through HTTP. So I'm going to go ahead and click on, or press yes, and then that's pretty much it for that part of this. Now here I've quickly switched over to computer management, where I've gone to the local users and groups on this laptop that I want to collect events from. Now what I want to do is to go into the event log readers, and I need to make sure that I add in the computer account for my collecting computer. Okay, because remember, this is the forwarding computer that we're looking at right now, and I want to add in the collecting computer here so that it has the right or the ability to read out of the event viewer, and it has that privilege. So I'm going to enter in the name of the computer. What was it? James Vista 64, I think it was. And I also need to make sure that I don't select just users and groups. I need to go to object types and also select computers and OK. And now I'm in business. I've got the appropriate membership now. Now also, just as an FYI, I also put in here a command prompt window to show you that you can do this from a command line as well. Normally we don't have to do that on an individual basis, but if you need to script that or something like that for a larger group of computers, that might be kind of a handy item to know about. Now then, here I am on the collecting computer, where I need to manage the services here as well. I'm going to run a utility for the Windows Event Collector utility, and I'm just going to space QC with this and press Enter, and what we'll see happen is it's going to prompt me to see whether I want to change the service to delay start and yes or no, and of course I'll say yes, and it's also going to start that service. And let me go ahead and exit out of this. And then, as I mentioned earlier, remember, you do have to have these two services running. The Windows Remote Management Service, it started also as a delayed start. And then here's the one that we just started from the command line, the Event Collector, which is also started as a delayed start. And now that that's all done, I'm ready to go to forwarded events and to start creating collections. Although actually we don't create the collections from here. This is just where we view the collections that will be coming in. You'll go to the subscriptions item here, right click, choose create subscriptions, and then this is where you just fill in the blanks, and you can just name it some arbitrary subscription name. I'll just call mine Lenovo. By the way, if you're not familiar with Lenovo, it's just the IBM ThinkPad, another name that they tagged on there. So that's what that is. It's just a brand name. And I'll just say that what I wanted to do. I want to collect warning, error, critical, any of those serious kinds of events, for example. I can specify where I want those events to be stored here on the collecting computer. Normally, I just leave them in forwarded events because that makes most sense to me. I don't want to mix it up with my other events from this local computer here, and that would happen if I potentially added it into some of these other events right there. So I'm just going to leave it there, and then I select the computers, and I'm going to click on Add Domain Computers. Of course, I'm looking for my Lenovo computer. Note that the computer object is selected here. And I'll just enter Lenovo. It'll automatically resolve and fill it into this in the background there. And there we see it. Now, what you can also do with this, if you don't want to spend a whole lot more effort if this isn't working at all, you can just also test it from this point to see whether or not it's making a connection to that laptop to be able to retrieve the data. And I click on test, and sure enough, we get connectivity test succeeded, so everything looks good there. Now, the next thing I need to do is to select the events that I'm actually interested in. What did I say? Critical warning and error, I think it was, and which logs I want. And I'm just going to choose the major ones, the application, security, system. That should be good for these purposes. But you can be as specific as you want to be. In fact, notice that once I've selected all of these things, what it's actually done is it's created XML code for me. And if you know XML coding and all the details with it, you can edit the query manually here and add in a whole bunch of other stuff of your own. So it's kind of almost programmatic in that sense. You can be as specific and granular as you want to be with all of this, but I'm okay with the items that we've selected so far. Now, for some of these other items that we can see here, for example, source computer initiated, advanced, we'll come back to that in a little while. So just be patient. I'll come right back to that in just a bit. But for the time being, at least, we see that we do have this active. We have events ready to be forwarded to me over here. Okay, right now we don't see anything. I can even, refresh the screen and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just not going to see anything quite yet. I don't think anyway. Let me refresh the screen. Yep, nope, nothing quite yet. So what I'm going to do is go over here to my Lenovo ThinkPad, and I'm going to go ahead and manually trigger some errors that would pop up. So I'm going to do this kind of damage on purpose. And when I do this, I'm going to go to open up a resource on one of my servers. So let me see, DC1, I think that's it. And then I'm just going to go to a utility. It's an old utility I've been using since like Windows 95, and it's called BadApp32. And this is designed to crash on purpose for testing reasons. Also, notice this, by the way. I'm running a 64-bit version of Windows here on the Lenovo, and I mentioned a while back, and this is just a tangent, that 16-bit applications cannot run on 64-bit Windows Vista. And if I try to run this, you'll see that it won't even allow me to run it. So that kind of tells me that exactly right there. BadApp32, though, is a 32-bit application that I can run, and it's got really cool options. I can make it really, really big if I wanted to. Unfortunately, the sound is grayed out, but in the 16-bit version, it actually makes an explosion sound when this gets to the end. But we'll just go ahead and let this run its course, and we'll generate an error out of this. And we see that we are now getting a problem, and then I'll close the program. Now, eventually, it's going to take a little while. We're not going to see this event populate immediately over here. Even if I refresh it, it's probably not going to show up quite right away. I may have to wait a few minutes for that. But I'll show you in a little while where you can accelerate that so that you can see a little bit faster if you want to. But while we're waiting for something to show up there, let's go back and address some of these things that I need to cover that we didn't address a little bit earlier. Move this up a little bit. Here's this advanced button, for example. The machine account. Remember that we added the James Vista 64 computer account into the event log readers over on the forwarding computer. That's what gave it the ability to pull the logs out of it. Okay, that's what we'll very often do in a domain environment. However, if I'm in a workgroup environment, then I'm more likely to choose a specific user, and I'll create a user account on that destination computer, and then I'll name that specific user here so that I can use a user account instead of a computer account to pull that data. And then, of course, you just enter in the username and password. Over here for the event delivery optimization, normal is just going to deliver the data about 5 events at a time unless 15 minutes or more goes by, and then it'll just send all the events that it has. This does not really care about bandwidth one way or the other. It doesn't conserve bandwidth. But if I do a lot of these events that I'm pulling from, then I might want to minimize the bandwidth instead. And as the name implies here, by the way, it just minimizes the bandwidth required to forward the events. Also, it does it less frequently. It's going to forward events every 6 hours, and it's going to do it in a push delivery mode. So my forwarding computer is going to trigger the push out to the collecting computer about every 6 hours. Okay. Then there's the minimized latency one. This is one where we're going to make sure that we get the events delivered with minimal delay. And this is going to be the choice if we want to make sure that we're collecting our alerts and critical events more quickly. It's going to use, again, the push delivery mode, and it's going to set a batch timeout of about 30 seconds. And then notice that there's also a custom one, and no matter what I try to do to click on it, it's just not going to take. It doesn't seem to want to let me do this. Well, with this one, you can do that from a command line, which I'll show you here shortly, where you can customize the length of time it takes to report these events. Also, I mentioned earlier you could use HTTPS if you wanted to, and there's the default port for that, so you can change that if you want to, but otherwise, we're just going to stick with HTTP for our current purposes. Okay, so I'm just going to OK out of that. Oh, and before I forget, this is grayed out now, but when you first create this this item, it allows you to check this item as well, and then you select computer groups. This relates to group policy objects, so I can configure a lot of this through group policy if I want to. By the way, when you click OK sometimes, it does give you this WinRM firewall exception. And the reason why we're making that exception now is because, and I'm going to go ahead and click on yes here, is because if I double click and open this back up again, notice that we changed this on the advanced to minimize latency. Remember, that's going to be a push from my client on the other side of things. So I need to open up the firewall on my side. I'm going to, for the time being, just go back to normal, however, and we'll just go back to that. Alright, let's go ahead and show you how you can modify this for customized purposes to even make it faster in terms of when you receive these events and when they're forwarded to you. For that, I'm going to again use the Windows Event Collector Service utility. So WECUtil, and then space SS, and then I'm going to enter in the name of the subscription. I already forgot what it was myself. What do I call it? Lenovo, okay. So we call it Lenovo. And then I'm going to enter in a space and then a /CM for custom. I'm just telling it that I want to use a custom option. Remember, that was a grayed out radio button earlier. Well, now it's going to allow me to plug in a value there. So I'm going to now go to WECUtil, again, Lenovo. And then this time I'm going to specify the duration in milliseconds for the delay. So I'm going to do a /HI colon, and then, let's see, 6,000 here in milliseconds would be 1 minute, right? Yeah, 1 minute. So I'm going to do it that way, and then I'm going to enter out of that. And then we'll see if I go back into this, that now on the Advanced tab, there's a custom item, and I can't change it now. Because I've done all that from a command line, I've kind of forced it that way. Now if I go to my forwarded events, let's see if anything, there it is. Okay, it's popped up now, and we see that we have received from that destination computer the BADApp32 error that did take place, and it tells me that it took place on my Lenovo computer over here, okay? So it kind of scrolled off the end there, but hopefully you can see the whole thing. So that's how we were able to retrieve events from remote systems. Now then, here I've switched back over to my laptop computer, which is my forwarding computer, and I'm showing you what I would do if this was in a work group. Of course, it's in a domain, and that's how I've been working with most of these things. But if it happened to be in a work group, you might need to know a couple of things for, exam purposes, for example. Here I would have to go to the Windows Firewall exception, and I'll just go down here, and I'll just show you how I would do this. Then I'd have to manually make a change here in my firewall. So in my Windows Firewall, I'll change settings, and I'll go to my exceptions, and I would have to make an exception here for remote event log management. And it's down in here somewhere. There it is, remote event log management. Okay, you would think you'd have to do that also for a domain environment either way, because we are remotely managing the event log, but it's not really necessary in a domain environment like I just showed you. This is only for a work group. So that's the first thing I would do, and I don't really need to do it here, so I'll cancel that for the time being. And then the next thing I would do is I would have to go to the event log readers security group again. So I'd go to my event log readers, and instead of having a computer there, I would click on add, and then I would enter in whichever account had administrator privileges to this particular security group. And that's how I would specify that in the Configure Advanced Subscription Settings dialog box when I actually create the subscription. You saw that earlier when I show you where you would have to do that. So that instead of doing it by computer, I do it by user in that dialog box. Okay? And then this is kind of freaky. Over on the collecting computer, so I'd go back over here. This is my collecting computer. I would do something else from the command line, and I'll go back to an administrative command prompt. This would have to be from an administrative command prompt. And it's kind of a long line, so I'm going to pause recording and type it in, and then I'll show it to you when I'm done. And here's the command. I do a WinRM set WinRM config client, and then at trusted hosts equals, and then I would have to enter in at the end. Oops, I almost forgot something at the end there. Got to end a brace there. But right in here where it says insert list, that's a variable. You'll have a text file that you'll specify a list of computers that are trusted for trusted hosts. And this would be a comma-separated value list. And this is going to be an important item to remember. The trusted host parameter that we're going to be using here, you configure this on the collecting computer. This sounds kind of weird to me because I figured you would put trusted hosts on the forwarding computer, but that's not how it is. So it's a little counterintuitive. Just remember, trusted hosts goes on the collecting computer. Now then, finally, I want to show you a few troubleshooting tools if you don't seem to be able to get this thing to work. You see this command line right here? Just enter this in, except that you'll substitute your own fully qualified domain name of your own system. We do use FQDNs instead of IP addresses, by the way, and that's because this will trigger a Kerberos authentication, and I'll then press enter here. And what should happen is if I've got the ability to communicate with this host and to retrieve data from it, then it should just give me stuff like this, other than some error message or something that says it could not communicate. So then this would simply confirm that I am able to properly communicate with the forwarding host. And then over here, I've switched over to the forwarding computer, and we want to confirm with this command that you see here whether or not it's able to actually listen for pull requests from the collecting computer. So if I press enter here, then we should see that, again, we get some gobbledygook. It doesn't give us an error message. It'll be pretty obvious if it's got a problem, but here it looks like everything is pretty well in order. In this nugget, we talked about event forwarding, and we started off with just kind of a functional overview, some high-level concepts to keep in mind, and then most of what we did was by way of demo, so that you could see the command lines that are used and the various ways of configuring the event forwarding functionality that's new with Windows Server 2008 and Windows Vista. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.